Okay, we're looking at part 2 here of the ancient Scythians and their connection to the Amazon warriors of old. And this is a kind of telling picture, and I know it's quite late, but if you look at the guy there in the gray with his arm bent back, he's got a hair-shaped mace head on a mace that has a wrist strap with it so he won't lose it. It's a bashing weapon that he has, and he does have a sword there on his side, but then he's fighting against a Scythian war horseman that has a spear and is coming at him in a lance way. You can also see the guy in the background behind him here, the red-headed dude here. He's got a bow on him. There's an arrow flying into the scene here, but you can also notice that Phrygian cap. And again, he's shown as being a redhead, right? And then you have this this idea of this big horse battle and horsemanship that's going on here. So let's look into this story of these ancient Scythians and let's bring them into Europe and show you where ancient things come from. Because you've already looked at them having a magical weapon like Mjolnir, where only one person can use it, and indeed this thunder and lightning weapon and so on that we talk about and the connections that go with that. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, it'll be in your top right hand corner at the very end of the video, and so you can go to the end and click on it. It'll show part 1, and I'll do that through the series. At the very end of each one in the top left will be the next one, so at the end of this one we'll be going top left hand corner to part 3. Tattooed Scythian warriors, descendants of the Amazons. The ancient Scythians, the ones who predate the nomadic ones, worshipped as their main deity not a god but a goddess, the half-snake, half-woman deity known as Tabiti, who was coincidentally fits the description of Tagitao's mother in the Scythian origin story. So it can show you an idea like that, and again we get this idea of a Medusa, right? Of these half snake people. But she was the earth goddess who was said to be the witness of all things. Often depicted as a woman with child, she traveled with a raven and a wolf. And that's a strange thing because those are very much in Western folklore. And people don't think about ravens and wolves being there, but now wolves go through this whole steppe area also. And these wolves and wolf clans, which you think of in Celts, and you see them wearing the wolf heads, the dresses and everything of, also comes all the way around through these Proto-Indo-Europeans we've been talking about, up around through the ice bridge and down into the Americas, and there you can see wolves. And the same situation going on with the headdress and the things like that. Symbolic connections that are the same, but a lot of this people would say, well, what else would you do, you know, worshiping animals and creatures? But when there starts to be too many connections, it gets to be a spider web. When you run into a spider web, you're kind of like, oh, hold on a minute. Yeah. Connections. The goddess is the most ancient of all deities, with depictions dating back over 29,000 years BC, and her worship held sway until only about 4,000 years ago when mankind spiraled into a never-ending warfare. Her names are almost endless. Anu or Anat, Iki, Archaea, Hathor, Isis, Danu, Kali, Inanna, Diana, comes from Danu, the Danube River, Danites, by the way, but then we also have, you know, Inanna is Diana, and this is Anat, as in Anatolia, Tanit, which we see kind of depicted in the name there too, and so you get a lot of these connections to the same goddess, and Venus, and the mother of all in heaven. And I showed you recently, if you'll look at one of my videos, it's called Mother of All Creation. It's a two-part series that a lady had put together, all of these talking about feminine worship and how it's gone. And this is another woman doing one about it. But I love this. It shows a lot of true connections and things that are lost. So the list would go on for pages, but they are all represented the same thing: the sacred feminine, the great mother. The fact that matriarchal or egalitarian societies might have existed, and in fact may have been to the norm prior to the historical period, is now dismissed by most mainstream historians. But I connect that they were the norm, and they did not die out suddenly. And I'll contend that there are definite times in there, with you hear about Ninhursag and all these ancient ones that really were controlling temples, running things, and the major deity. Inanna's cult was gigantic, and that's the Inanna cult itself. But then if we look at the idea of the same thing of being Diana and Venus and all of this, and these Venus statues and where they spread out to that you see in that video I just referred to, it gets to be overwhelming how many people had this same thing all over this area, all over Middle Earth, amazingly. So there was a time, though, that transition during which women and men still existed as equals in society, or their needs and respect were that way. And the Amazons are a compelling example of one of these traditions. Now, Herodotus, with his usual flair, tells a remarkable story about how the Amazons came to be with the Scythians, which makes a great deal more sense when one understands that the nomadic Scythians were later arrivals, and the Amazons were part of an earlier civilization still existing to the south of the Black Sea, but in constant threat from the Greeks, as the accounts of many battles suggest. He recounts that after the Battle of Thermodon, several galleys carrying Amazon prisoners were retaken by the captives, and the women came ashore in the land of Scythia on the north shore of the Black Sea, and they engaged some of the Scythians in combat, who, upon discovering that the dead were actually women, decided not to try to kill the newcomers, but woo them instead. So they got attacked by the women. But there are stories in ancient times where, of course, you'd go and fight the men, and then there's not enough men left, and there might be some old people in the village, and they just to go ransack the village, right? Well, sometimes when they went in the village, the women had their shit together, and the old men had their shit together because they used to be warriors too, and they put up enough of a fight to cause pretty much a problem. That's another story, though, I guess. So they eventually approached them unarmed, and the two groups decided to merge, but not without negotiations. The Amazons refused to live as Scythian women, and they would not give up their place in society, so their new Scythian husbands agreed and asked for their inheritance to be given to them, and that they left for lands to the northeast. This story seems to tell of a merging of the nomadic Scythians with the earlier matriarchal society, and their migration away from the patriarchal societies, rising to power to the south, and eventually the entire world. Well, I mean, there's a way of looking at it. I mean, men were always the biggest, the strongest, the warriors and things, and women were always that. But were women always, meek and cowardly and wouldn't defend themselves in any way? And no, in fact, they don't even do that today, given the opportunity. And if people were constantly under threats like that, people would know what to do. Women carry mace. Back in these days, women carried a mace. Women would go out hunting berries, but they weren't idiots. They'd have a knife, they'd have this. You'd come try to grab me, and I'd gig you a couple of times up under your ribs. Hey, chase me now as you're bleeding into your lungs. Chase me. You want to hunt me still? I don't think so. So, we could go from there, I guess. Of course, the most mainstream historians call the Amazons creatures of myth, not because there are not ample records of their battles and individuals, but for the reason Strabo, the Greek historian, put it 2,000 years ago when he said, "For who can believe that an army of women or a city or a nation could ever subsist without men?" So this tale had to have been somewhat far-fetched. How did these women have children? What happened to the males that were born? And was it only females that were up? And now you get this idea of a Diana too situation, right? Where these female priests were running things for a while. It's Sumeria too, right? Definitely high up in there doing a lot of things. But now, isn't Wonder Woman an Amazonian? And isn't she called Diana? Yeah. Let's just go on. What he says next. And not to only subsist, but to make inroads upon the territories of other people. So they went even on the attack. And obtain possession not only of the places near them, and advance as far as the present Ionia. So apparently, you know, they in ancient times had encroached quite a bit. And so this idea seems like they may not have been as much of a satiated people either so much, or they were on the move at one time. And is that the way the other ones are too? And they just refer to them as being nomadic because they were on the move at that time. They even dispatched an expedition across the sea to Attica. So apparently they had come into the Mediterranean. And so now you see that maybe the stories about how whenever they're Iliad and the Odyssey and things like that actually contain a far people that run through here. And if you look up, there's a lot of ways to do it, but one of the ways to look up is like Ethiopia. If you look up Ethiopia, the Greeks, it shows you that it's all over the place, but then it tells you in it that it comes from all the battles that they had gone from here and here. And so a lot of people always think, well, that means Ethiopia up at the end of the Nile, right? And you're like, well, no, they didn't. That place was called Abyssinia. And there's Ethiopians there now, and they called Ethiopians living there. But if you look at the map, they show you, when you look up Ethiopians of the Greeks, it shows you they're not up there in that Horn area. And there's more over in North Africa, but then there's a whole lot all over the place. And they call the people of India, Eastern Ethiopians, and they're basically scattered all the way through and right through this Scythian area. This is amazing when you find out how they're blonde-haired, red-haired, and fairly pale of being, but red ochre burials follow these guys around like crazy too, and I've shown you videos about that with my red ochre symbology here. And so who would indeed could believe such a thing? Certainly not the men who have written history, but now we have their bodies. Women buried with the respect once, though only reserved for men, and these tattooed women warriors are much harder to call a myth. So, boom. Well, that last part, of course, is her conjecture after Attica. So, kind of neat. Very interesting. So now we've drawn the Amazons into the concept and where they perhaps blended into society. And maybe it was somewhat of a matriarchal society. And there was a lot of blending in. And some of your women, or some of my this and that, and trading, and then kings and things when they got together. And that happened somewhat. And you can see it reflected even in Egypt with the Amarna tablets and so on, that people from up in the Mitanni were coming into that area. And indeed, that's about it for this one. But then your top left-hand corner's part 2 coming up. And so we'll go ahead and click onto that. And like, share, and subscribe. Throw a comment down in the bottom or something for me, guys. Or go back and watch these things without commenting on the side. Peace. We'll see y'all there.